Hi, good morning. My name is Torres from Paso Mental Health. Today we're going to talk about finding meaning in times of uncertainty. During the pandemic, there's going to be a lot of difficult things to kind of get adjusted to. Going back to normal life or still staying indoors, and probably trying to get adjusted to whatever things will be permanently changed after this. Not to get too scary or anything, but like sometimes these are things that happen, right? Like there's changes that come about with things that affect the whole world. So it is very important to try to see this as a good thing, as difficult as it is. Everyone has a different situation, so I want to be very respectful of that, right? Some people have lost loved ones, friends of friends, and so take some of this with a grain of salt, right? Because I understand that maybe it can come off a little bit insensitive if I tell you this is what you should do. There's different situations. For example, there's people who are dealing with stress during these times. So when that happens, there are coping skills that you can use. When you're grieving, that's very different, right? Because when that happens, we have to go through a process, right? And we can help you throughout the process, but there's a different way to go about it that we still can avoid some of that emotional pain, if that makes sense. But let's start with the pandemic. This is a different form of adversity. So it's an invisible threat. So compared to other disasters and things that happen, the way that we attack this is very different. It's not something that we kind of like go online and send money, send aid, where we actively do something. And this is very hard for us, especially as Americans, right? We like to do things. This is kind of like why in Hollywood we like the go-getter, loner, doesn't go by the rules kind of hero that just does things, right? And doesn't really like regard the rules as much because things have to get done. We like that, right? We like to envision ourselves that way, especially the newer generations, right? They want to really impact the world in a positive way. However, this is very different, right? And so we have to do nothing to do a lot sometimes. Now, I want to be clear, right? A lot of people are quarantining, and that's not necessarily going to help, right? We have to really keep in mind ourselves. So self-care is something that will help others, right? We have a hierarchy of needs, right? According to Maslow, and I really like that. I always use that in my practice, right? Because we forget that we don't just have the basic needs, which is food, shelter, and protection. We need self-esteem, right? We need to value ourselves, take care of ourselves. And not just that, sometimes we go without those needs, right? Depending on our lives, we will have some distance in certain areas of our upbringing. Upbringing is very important. We don't live perfect lives. I don't think any of us do, right? Some are easier than others, that's for sure. But during this time, I think that these problems or needs that we have kind of become more expanded. And you'll see what I mean in a little bit. But basically what I'm saying is the things that go unmet before the pandemic can become a little bit worse during the pandemic. And so this is how it's different than other disasters, right? Because other disasters can just happen in a certain part of the world, or it can happen locally, but they kind of focus on the here and now a little bit more and what we need to do to help. Rather in this case, it is a lot of internal things that are going on, not just the health part, which we'll start with the health part regardless, right? But just so we know where we're headed with this. We learn a lot about ourselves in times of despair. This is something that is not a good feeling, but it's a necessary feeling sometimes. And we don't like change. We'll talk about change in a little bit, but it's something necessary. So I'm going to try to help you see things in a more positive way or more compassionate way towards yourself. So just bear with me. Work with tolerance and respect first and foremost, right? The problem here right now is that we have a moment in time where a lot of people have different beliefs about what's going on, right? And we can go all the way to kind of like what we believe about the pandemic and, you know, how we believe it's been created. And I don't want to go too deep into this, right? But the problem is that it is creating a little bit of a divide between us. And so it has to be addressed. So I'm not going to tell you, you know, what you should believe, but I will tell you a little bit about kind of like how to consume this information, right? So first of all, I'm not going to tell you to avoid the internet or avoid your phones. I mean, we're kind of addicted to that. So that's like almost a separate problem. But I will tell you to learn from proper sources, right? There's going to be conflicting information even if it's coming from a reliable source, right? It takes years of data and collecting and kind of like using that same research to kind of like create a meta-analysis so we can come to a little bit more of a consensus. But as far as human behavior, that's a lot more difficult to predict sometimes. And so it takes some time, right? And so just keep in mind that, you know, when you're out there kind of like looking for truth, it's very difficult to either find something concise or bring someone out of what they believe. So therefore, don't resist that, right? Don't try to change what someone believes. You try to use the internet as something that can be used correctly, and then so for you consume information, see what works best for your health, and don't try to kind of like preach to other people, right? That's very difficult because, you know, we have friends and family that, you know, might believe something very different. And I have people who are very close to me, very close to me, and they have different beliefs than I do. And that's fine, right? Because what helps me is like, we're all human beings, and at the end of the day, we try to do good in the world, right? But, you know, I can see how this is a point of stress. Perception is reality, right? So like, you know, just understand that people might see the world very different than you do, right? Some people might see green when you see blue, and, you know, that's fine. As long as, you know, we can work together, and especially, you know, in this country, we're all different cultures and beliefs and religions. This is what makes us successful, right? It's not what is hindering us. So yeah, so respect others. And, you know, blame and intolerance is not going to hurt. It's going to hurt you. It's not. It's something that we have to be considerate about. Like, you know, we have certain feelings about what we see in the news, what we see other people do. Try to be patient about it. Try to focus on yourself. Why? Because it's doing more than you think, right? Once someone sees that something is working for you, they might say like, well, I'll have a little bit of what he's having, right? So well, you lead by example. But it takes some time, right? But I think it's a little bit more effective. So empathy is essential, especially like, you know, with different parts of the world. We want to see that, you know, not everyone is coming from perspective of just like believing something firmly. They might have different experiences that might make their beliefs a little bit more realistic once we are in their shoes. So it's important to kind of like see things from their perspective. I hope that makes sense to you. So let's talk about stress, right? Not just the stress of the pandemic, but again, how we talked about, right? Like the things are happening in society, right? So this is important. You'll see why, because people are asking about how do I know what I can and can't do during the pandemic. So hopefully this gives you a little bit more of an idea of what, you know, you're gonna allow yourself to do, right? I'm gonna try to base this off also from what I hear from other doctors say and all that. So don't think I'm just kind of like, don't just take my word for it. But again, don't also like just go and do what, you know, might be suggested, like underlying in my words, right? So stress is not necessarily bad. Stress is something that helps you survive, right? You know, bear comes running at you, you get stressed out, your adrenaline gets going, you have to run. This is a similar thing when you have to write a paper, you have to interview for a job and all that stuff. Your body has pretty much the same reaction, right? At different degrees, it's a spectrum, right? But it's still kind of like using the same chemicals and whatnot, right? For lack of a better term. But chronic stress is bad, okay? That's important to consider, that you continuously being stressed out is not going to be helpful. So it's going to start affecting your health, right? You start releasing a lot of cortisol, right? And cortisol can begin releasing very early on in your life, and you kind of become used to it. And so if I'm getting this correctly, it's kind of like something that is going to affect your brain, even shrink your brain to an extent, or parts of your brain. And so we can reverse those effects because, you know, the problem with cortisol is like it starts with nurturing, right? Once we don't get enough nurturing when we're kids and all that, which is again something that I want to get into a little bit later on, that tends to affect how we perceive the world, how we react to the world. And I'm not here to just tell you, okay, like, you know, force your loved ones to nurture you. Sometimes that can happen, right? We grow up in different worlds, and I don't want to, you know, make anyone depressed just yet, right? But like, it is something that can happen. And so how you reverse the effects of cortisol is through self-care. So the typical response would be, you know, to do meditation, yoga, and all these things to help you with that, right? Because you're starting releasing endorphins and reducing the effects of cortisol. However, if you put it in words in terms of, you know, self-nurturing, that does a lot more, right? Because there's a lot of little things you can do that will help you. But again, we'll get into that in a little bit. Your body also is affected a lot by stress, right? So your adrenal glands release epinephrine and norepinephrine. And so this adrenaline can lead to hypertension and, you know, increased chances of a heart attack or stroke. And again, there's cortisol involved, right? Which increases your appetite, and then you get cravings, right? You get cravings for comfort food. So with that, it's kind of like you're just in this cycle of kind of like self-defeat, right? So the stress hormones at the end of the day also start to affect your immune cells, leading up to susceptibility to infection, right? In this case, it could also leave you susceptible to COVID-19. So that's kind of like what I want to get at, right? At the end of the day, is that some of you are unsure about what to do. Just consider that, you know, you do have to take proper precautions, but it's not just about staying indoors, because you're not getting exercise, you're probably not eating that well. And so therefore, you're not getting what you need to keep your immune system up, right? During October, I went out to play soccer, right? And I got kicked in the face, and I had a laceration on my eyelid. And so what happened there is I had to be taken to the ER. And I was assuming the doctor was going to be mad at me because I was outdoors risking, you know, COVID, right? And she had told me, I'm actually okay with you doing that because one, you're outdoors, and second, you're taking care of yourself, right? Yes, of course, it's not ideal, but at the same time, it's kind of like, you know, you do have to exercise, you do have to take care of yourself, right? Staying indoors all the time is kind of like, you know, you're taking a large precaution that's kind of like ignoring other areas of your life. So, yeah, like, I'm okay with you, you know, playing soccer, but just kind of like, try to balance it out. Eat well, eat your, you know, your berries and everything that kind of like boosts your immune system, right? And so I really took that to heart because it's kind of like, you know, I noticed that I was stressing out, and I think that's even why I got kicked in the face, right? Because probably my mind was elsewhere thinking about, you know, what could happen. But again, right, like, you know, you don't have to necessarily, you know, go out and be out in public, but self-care is important, right? Because if you do have to, if someone is asking you, if your job requires you to go out there, then do the next thing you have to do. Not the next best thing, because you still have to do it, but keep self-care in mind, right? Keep your health in mind. So we talked about meaning, right? And so there's also a little bit of a debate about kind of like how we as human beings, we need to find meaning in things that happen, right? And especially now in the pandemic, we want to find meaning in all this that's going on. What did it happen, right? And, you know, it's difficult, right? Not everyone has spiritual beliefs. And so therefore, you have to give things meaning. And I think this applies to everyone across the board, right? So let's say, for example, that a grieving parent, you know, who dearly misses their child, can't find meaning in what happened, right? So they have this idea of like, let me give it meaning. Let me start a support group, right? Let me start a support group for other parents who are grieving. And they do, and they connect really well. And so it gives them a little bit of kind of like a little bit more purpose in, you know, their loss, right? Does it compensate for it? No, it doesn't, right? Because it's something very difficult that might stay with them the rest of their lives. But, you know, they got something good of it, right? Like they helped others through their loss. Now, another person in that group might say like, if I hadn't met you, I wouldn't have found, like, I found this way to cope with it. So for them, it's kind of like they found meaning, right? And so it depends on the perspective, right? Some people find meaning, and that's good. Some people have to give it meaning. But I think that overall, you have to give it meaning yourself, right? You always have that power. And I hope that makes sense to you, because I think that's a very important part of this presentation. Coping is easier said than done, right? I think as a therapist, you haven't seen me really talk a lot about kind of like, you know, the specifics of like drink water, take these types of vitamins and all that stuff, because you know these things, right? I think that you have to integrate it in the sense like it becomes part of your life rather than something that you have to add to your life, because otherwise, you know, you get this imposter syndrome, right? And you feel like you're trying to fix something that's wrong with you. But my mentality is that there's nothing wrong with you now. You as you are, that's good enough. But you can continue improving on that. Right? So it's kind of like people tend to say, I'm wrong about this. I should like exercise more. I should do this more. It's like, well, yeah, but like you're a busy person, right? Or you're going through a lot of stress. Maybe it's hard to do so, right? So make it part of your routine. You do 5 minutes instead of, you know, you wanting to, you know, do a treadmill for 30 minutes. We also kind of like need to feel like we did something, where sometimes like just a minute to 5 minutes is just so much of a difference that is not so time consuming and energy consuming. But you know, depends on you, right? I mean, just try to integrate it in a way where it's like doesn't feel like you're adding something to your day, right? And so we'll get to more of that in a little bit, like I said. Another thing is, I don't like positive self-talk. I don't like terms of coping skills again, because like, you know, don't get me wrong, those are good things, but once I put that jargon out there, then again, people are kind of like, I need to do this to fix myself, and there's nothing to fix. I kind of like to put it in terms of compassionate self-talk, self-validation, recognition. By that I mean that you're not getting these needs met sometimes, right, by others, and that's fine. That's completely fine. It's just kind of like, it's important to be social creatures, but right now it's kind of difficult. So this is an opportunity to do the things that we don't do, right? So people are kind of like asking me, how do I do that, right? Like it feels kind of weird to be like, I'm so great, or I'm so awesome. It's like, well, don't think of it as like entitlement. Think of it as self-empathy, right? Where you kind of recognize with the compassion that's like, thanks for trying, right? Like, you know, I tried starting a conversation today with someone. It completely, you know, blew up in my face, but thanks for trying. You know, it's hard. It might make me feel even more scared of doing it again, but I gave it a shot, and that's all I can do, right? And so that's like that's kind of like, I think, an easier way to try to make your life a little bit easier, to try to consume life a little bit easier. Now let's go through the generic self-care advice, right? Do yoga, exercise, meditation, rock climbing, you name it. You have to do these things for, you know, to release endorphins, to feel well. It's not just physically, right? Your brain really appreciates it. Now, why am I saying different things? Is because like, find what works for you, right? I don't tell people, let's do meditation, sit down for 5, 10, 15 minutes, because if you have a lot of anxiety already, it makes it a little bit worse, because your mind and body is resisting it, right? It's kind of like, I don't want to put your brain as a bad guy here, but it kind of like likes being where it's at, right? Like, it's the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. And so it is trying to protect you. And so you have to kind of like relearn that the stillness and meditation is helpful, right? That kind of like taking yourself out of a situation through exercise and focusing on how fatigued you are is healthy, right? And there's a lot of more things that happen with your body, but, you know, just, you know, for layman's terms, right? Like, that's very helpful. And then the uncertainty of it all, right? That's something very, very difficult. Now, I want you to know that uncertainty is not a bad thing. It just we don't like not knowing what the next step is, right? Uncertainty can bring about good things, right? You don't know if you're going to get that job you want. You don't know if you're going to like start that family you wanted. You don't know if you're going to, move to a different part of the world, and you don't know if you're going to like it or not, right? And if you love it, then uncertainty just kind of like doesn't become a problem, right? But now you have the uncertainty of like, am I sick? Is my loved one sick? Yeah, that's a bad type of uncertainty. But uncertainty itself, in and of itself, is not bad, right? We are creatures of habit, so we tend to reject change a little bit, and that's how we talked about the brain being a little bit resistant to that. Now, let's get to the difficult thing, which I think like it's a little bit of what people are waiting for. So sorry if I took long to get into this. Helping my my child through this, right? And so you'll see in my presentation, I scratched out child and put myself. Why? Because you have to understand that, you don't have to, right? But like, it's good to understand that, children do not always perceive self-sacrifice as a motivator, right? If I jump in front of a train for my child, I might be saying like, because it's a fatherly instinct or whatever, right? My child doesn't see it that way. They're like, why did you do that, right? Why would you abandon me, right? And that's something that I don't blame you for, especially mothers. Mothers have that instinct immediately after having a child. And that's a good thing, but the problem is like, it kind of like short circuits that part of that saying like, hey, they also need me to be in good shape. And that's something that I always focus on. It's easier for me and for you, right? If I help your child understand the benefits of doing well in school, they might understand it through my perspective, right? Not through your perspective. And so, there's this thing we found out about cats, for example, and you see what I'm getting at. It's like we used to think that cats bring a dead bird to our door because it's a gift, right? And it turns out that the cat is telling you, no, you need to be a better hunter because you're the alpha here. So I'm teaching you so you become a better hunter, right? And so we have to see what the kids are telling us in that way, subconsciously, right? Especially because they don't have that level of insight sometimes. Some kids they surprise me. They're so insightful, but usually they're trying to tell something they don't know, right? I mean, especially when, there's divorce in the family and all that, they start to not cope well with what's going on around them, right? Because again, there's a hierarchy of needs. And so sometimes, you don't have that parent around to tell you, I'm proud of you, good job. This is how you do things, right? And so keep that in mind, that you need your child to see that you're okay, right? And it's not just about, oh, you be okay and your child's going to be okay. It's going to help a lot. But this also comes with reflecting, modeling, and empathy, right? That you reflect how they're feeling, because sometimes they don't understand, right? This is very important. And if you need resources on that, I'll give you some, because that surprises me how well it works with both kids and adults, because reflecting to me sounds like a form of empathy, right? Where you tell someone, instead of telling them you need to do this, or like things are going to be okay, or you'll recover fast enough or whatever, into you're upset because you failed this test, you're sad because I had to discipline you, you're angry because I took away your Xbox. And so it's important to consider that once they kind of like get that information, sometimes you kind of like let them know, yeah, that is why I'm upset, right? So they start recognizing faster what it is that they feel and put it into words, right? And then so with adults, it also works great, because you can tell an adult, you're upset because you broke your leg, right? And this is from a video, so don't think I'm plagiarizing. I'll give you the resource. But like you're upset because you broke your leg, and then so that gives a person to kind of like sit down and say like, yeah, like it'll get better. I'm just upset right now. The problem with reflecting is like once you get it down, you will not get a lot of the credit, right? Because now they have this level of insight, they'll learn how to calm themselves down, and so you'll be like that. You'll be that invisible thread where you kind of like do something and no one really notice how that happened, right? But I would like to talk to anyone who's interested about that, because I think it works wonders. Depression, anxiety, right? Like this is the typical stuff. They go hand in hand. And, you know, I think that the best way to tackle it right now, right, in this situation, we can go on forever on this topic. But the best way right now is to be careful about how you consume information, because we're still evolving. We're not at the point where we can really digest the information that's coming in so fast, right? Because we just kind of like, social media is pretty recent, right? I didn't grow up with any type of social media, and the internet was very slow. So to like really consume as much information as I do today compared to, you know, the 90s is very jarring if you think about it, right? So we're not designed for this. So you have to be careful about what you consume and how you consume it, because, you know, it's not as clear cut as like, you know, someone's trying to manipulate you through things. It's more about kind of like, for example, you see all these ads about Planet Fitness and it's just a constant reminder that you're not fit, right? Or you see all these reminders about McDonald's, so you're like, you're not fit, and you're also, now you want McDonald's, right? So it's like, it's too much coming in at once, right? So and then you get all the news about politics and all that. Again, I won't get into it. I'm sure that's very stressful for everyone. So you have to be mindful of how much and what type of information you consume, while kind of like not, you know, giving attention to not get like a little bit more, you know, let's just say, right, like try not to give an F about the things that, you know, you're looking at, and that's how you have to be, right? Thought reframing does not occur instantly, so it takes time. Please don't give up just the first time things happen, especially kids, right? Kids tend to kind of like, oh, it was impossible. And as adults, we do that too a lot, but because we forget that we accomplished things in the past, right? We forget that, oh, this wasn't so hard after all. Riding a bike wasn't so hard after all. Driving wasn't so hard after all. I still haven't, you know, learned stick, and to me, it feels like it's going to be difficult. Everyone's like, it's super easy, so I know it's going to be easy. So I just need to like get over it, right? And so we forget that things that seem impossible yesterday and are possible today were somewhat of an accomplishment. And we just kind of like forget about it over time. And so this is why reframing how you see things seems a little bit impossible. But then over time, you're like, okay, yeah, I do feel less stressed out. Like, and you notice, because you notice a conversation between friends and you're like, man, that used to stress me out so much. And now it's kind of like whatever, right? And so you have to face yourself, right? You have to, with crisis comes opportunity, right? I think it's the Chinese who's like, you know, use the same word for crisis as you do for opportunity, or at least that's what I learned from The Simpsons. And so and I think that's true, right? Because you have to make changes when these things happen, right? I remember a lot with, like, you know, the 90s Batman were so bad that they had to start the new Batmans with Christopher Nolan, and someone had said on YouTube, if this is what needed to happen for us to get the new Batman, then I'm all for it. And I always took that as a good analogy for life, right? We have to kind of like almost ruin something sometimes for things to get better. Now, sadly, in this case, in a lot of cases, it takes over our lives and other people's lives, and, you know, people will die. Right? That's just the reality. And so how much we learn from this is up to ourselves. Not trying to, again, preach to others, right? Because you might be a person who lost a loved one and you feel very angry or upset about, you know, the things that we haven't changed so far. But we have changed over time, right? Things have changed over time in society, right? It depends on how you see it. We have a little bit of a negative view right now about society, but we come a long way. We have a lot of comforts now, right? We have a lot of things that help us survive, and our lifespan is a lot longer than it was a few years ago. So you really have to see the good things that we have done over the years. But resist persists, right? So like if you have social anxiety, that's a good example, because you resist social settings, but you will have to be in a social setting regardless, right? You will have to go to Walmart, you will have to go to the store, to the doctor's office, and it can be jarring, right? Some people don't understand how much anxiety people are going through in the social setting, right? Because some people are really good at masking that anxiety, right? Even though they feel like everyone's noticing that. But this is just an example of the saying, what resist persists, right? That there's kind of like no point in avoiding something, right? It will come to you. And so how efficiently we get through that fear is up to you. Now, let's be realistic. It's not going to happen overnight. And second, we don't have to be sink or swim about it. It's what works for you, right? And so just be compassionate, right? This is what I talk about, compassion and self-talk. Be compassionate with yourself. You have to learn this, but it will take time, and hopefully it'll be much easier than you think it is. So lastly, reinventing yourself during these times, right? You have to reinvent yourself whatever happens, right? Even if you kind of like got the better side of these things, right? Where you didn't struggle financially, you didn't struggle with work, you saved money because you didn't have to go to the office and all that, and everyone in your life is doing okay. You still had to find a way to reinvent yourself, right? Just the fact that people were working from home was giving people a little bit of cabin fever, right? I had to work from home for a couple weeks, I think. And to me, it's like, great, I'm like saving all this money. But like, once I got back to the office, I was like, oh, wow, like, you know, it just feels different, right? Even though I'm spending more energy and all that, you know, it just felt better to have this kind of routine where I got myself out of that door. And so that's important. And there, so, you know, if you can see my hierarchy of needs, well, not mine, Maslow's, right? But the one I put there is that we have basic needs, and I think that that's the overarching theme, right? That it's not just about the food, shelter, safety, is that in these times you realize what's been lacking even more, right? So if you're afraid of social settings, again, like I said, and now you're comfortable inside, indoors, it's just making the problem a little bit worse, because you still need that, right? You still need to build a network of people, even if it's 2 or 3 people. You know, I recently saw 2 of my friends after so long, and, you know, I didn't realize how helpful it was, right? I slept so much better just to kind of like be able to talk about things that have been going on, and knowing like, yeah, there's other people that feel like I do, right? And so sadly, you know, I know that I might be, again, I said easier said than done, right? In one of the slides, I know this isn't easy, right? Some of you and your kids have a hard time with reinventing yourself, with coping, with you know, being focused and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, you know, I like that hierarchy, because you have to keep in mind, am I meeting these needs, right? And with the pandemic, it's a good reminder of the things that are not being met, or that need a little bit more work. So, you know, hopefully this helps you see it in a little bit more of a positive light. You know, if it doesn't, at least kind of like, you know, good job on, you know, staying strong during these times. Hi everyone, so if you have any thoughts or comments about this video, please comment on the bottom, send us some questions, something we can address directly, so that way it doesn't feel like, you know, we're just kind of like covering something in general. We want this to be really directed towards you. So anything we can help with, just comment, like, subscribe.